You wake up in a room with no windows. It hums. It shakes gently, like something breathing. You are not home. You are not anywhere you have ever been before. And in a few hours, you will do something no one has ever done, and no one has ever done since. Somewhere below you, the ground is already dark. Rain is already falling on forest no road has ever properly reached. You don't know that yet. Right now, all you know is the hum of the engines and the low murmur of other passengers settling in for a short flight. But right now, you are just a man in a suit, sitting in seat 18C. It is the day before Thanksgiving, 1971, Portland, Oregon. The airport is quiet. Holiday travelers, mostly families. A few businessmen finishing the year's last trip before the long weekend. You blend into all of it perfectly. You bought your ticket in cash, one way. You gave a name at the counter, a name that was not yours, and the woman behind the desk did not look twice. Why would she? Men in suits buy plane tickets every day. Men in suits do not hijack them. You board Northwest Orient Flight 305, a short hop north to Seattle, 36 passengers, a crew of 6. You order a bourbon and soda before the plane even leaves the ground. You light a cigarette. This is 1971. No one stops you. Then you pass a note to a flight attendant. Her name is Florence Schaffner. She puts the note in her purse without reading it. She thinks you are just another businessman with a phone number he is too shy to say out loud. You lean toward her and speak quietly. Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb. She opens it. The words on that page will end up in an FBI file that stays open for the next 45 years. A case file so large it will one day fill entire filing cabinets, given its own internal code name. Agents will call it NORJAC, Northwest Hijacking. Your demands are simple. $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes. And when the plane lands in Seattle, you want them waiting on the tarmac. Here's the strange part. You are polite about it. You order another drink while you wait. You tip the flight attendant for it. You tell her you don't have a grudge against the airline, that this isn't personal. You let the other passengers go. All 36 of them walk off that plane in Seattle believing they had a delayed flight. Nothing more. You keep the crew. You keep the money. You keep the parachutes. And then you ask the pilot to take off again, south this time toward Reno, flying low and slow, gear down, flaps at 15 degrees, exactly the way you specify. You know these details. You know them like a man who has read every page of a flight manual or flown 100 flights just like this one. Somewhere over southwest Washington, near a town called Ariel, the cabin door in the rear of the plane opens. The crew, locked in the cockpit ahead of you, feels the pressure change. A shudder passes through the whole aircraft. Later, they will describe it as the plane physically bucking, like something heavy had just left it. By the time the plane lands in Reno, the rear stairs are hanging open, and you are gone. No struggle, no blood, no parachute found tangled in the trees below, just an empty seat, a hand-rolled cigarette butt, a black tie left behind, and $200,000 that vanished into the dark with you, somewhere between the lights of Portland and the black stretch of forest below. Think about what that jump actually meant. It was November. It was night. The temperature at altitude was near freezing and dropping fast as the plane climbed. You wore a suit, a raincoat, loafers, no helmet, no gloves, and a reserve parachute investigators later realized had been sewn shut for training purposes only. It could not have opened. You had, whether you knew it or not, only one real chance to survive. You jumped anyway. Into rain. Into wind shear strong enough to fling a man miles off course. Into a canopy of Douglas fir so dense that search teams would later walk within feet of a man and never know it. Why would anyone do that? Investigators spent years trying to answer that question. Some believed you were a paratrooper, maybe military, maybe a smoke jumper who fought wildfires for a living, someone who had jumped into rough terrain before and lived to do it again. The specificity of your instructions to the pilot convinced many agents you had real aviation experience, possibly even flown cargo planes yourself. Others believed you must have died on impact, your body and the money lost forever in the mountains of the Pacific Northwest, dissolved slowly into the wet earth over decades. For years, the FBI's prime suspect was a man named Richard McCoy, who pulled off a nearly identical hijacking just months later and was caught. He had the military parachuting background investigators wanted. He denied it until his death, and his family has denied it ever since. Another was Dwayne Weber, a small-time criminal whose wife came forward decades later, insisting he had confessed to her on his deathbed, whispering a name investigators had never even considered. Neither theory ever produced hard proof. No fingerprint match, no parachute, no definitive link beyond a resemblance and a story told secondhand, years after the only person who could confirm it was gone. Then, in 1980, a boy named Brian Ingram was digging in the sand along the Columbia River at a spot called Tina Bar when he found something strange buried just below the surface. 3 bundles of cash, rotting rubber bands disintegrating in his hands. $5,800, give or take. FBI technicians matched the serial numbers to the ransom exactly. For a moment, the world believed the case was finally about to close, but the money only deepened the mystery. Tina Bar was miles from where investigators believed you had jumped. How did it get there? Had the river carried it downstream over the years, buried by shifting sand and spring floods? Or had you buried it there yourself, alive, only to vanish afterward and never come back for it? No trace of you was ever found again. Not a bone, not a boot, not a single credible sighting that ever held up to scrutiny. Over 4 decades, the FBI chased more than 1,000 suspects. Military veterans with the right training, local men with old grudges against the airline, deathbed confessions from relatives desperate to close a family secret. Every lead ended the same way. Nothing solid enough to close the file. In 2016, the Bureau finally suspended the active investigation. Not solved, just quietly set down, the way you set down something you have carried so long your hands have gone numb. Think about the search that followed you. For weeks, the largest ground and air search in the history of the Pacific Northwest combed that stretch of forest. Helicopters, National Guard troops on foot, trained trackers walking shoulder to shoulder through underbrush so thick they had to hack a path with machetes. They found nothing. Not a scrap of the parachute canopy, not a shoe, not a single thread of the clothes you were wearing when you stepped out into the dark. How does a man vanish that completely? Some investigators eventually stopped believing you vanished at all. They believed the forest simply never let you go. That the impact, in the dark, in that terrain, at that speed, was never survivable to begin with. And that somewhere under decades of fallen branches and new growth, you have been there the entire time. Others believe the opposite, that you walked out of those woods within hours, blending back into a nearby town, maybe with help waiting for you at a prearranged spot, maybe with a car and a change of clothes already hidden nearby. If you had planned the jump that precisely, why wouldn't you have planned the landing too? For years afterward, every strange rumor got attached to your name. A man in a small Washington town who came into sudden money. A relative's dying confession recorded on a cassette tape that surfaced decades later. A retired paratrooper who bore an uncanny resemblance to the police sketch and who reportedly went quiet whenever the case came up at family dinners. None of it ever held together under investigation. Every single one of these stories eventually collapsed under the same problem. No hard evidence, no confirmed remains, no confirmed parachute. Nothing but a description built from memory and money that was found in a river. There is something else people forget. In the months after you jumped, at least 4 other men tried to copy what you did. None of them succeeded the way you apparently had. One was caught within days. One's parachute failed entirely. Airlines began installing a mechanical device on the rear stairs of that exact aircraft model, a device that made it physically impossible to lower them again mid-flight. It is still called, in aviation manuals to this day, the Cooper vane. An entire piece of engineering, built into commercial aircraft for the rest of aviation history, exists because of what you did on one flight, one night in 1971, which means somewhere, in a stretch of forest that has grown thicker and darker in the 50 years since, there may still be a story the ground has never given back. A parachute rotted into the soil, a skeleton or the absence of one, or nothing at all. Just a man who did the impossible and then made himself impossible to find. Here is what almost no one remembers. The name on your ticket was never the name the world would come to use. You told the counter agent your name was Dan Cooper. A reporter misheard it or misprinted it in the chaos of that first news cycle, and the mistake stuck. It spread across every wire service, every newspaper, every headline, until the real name you gave that day was buried almost as deep as the money at Tina Bar. The world would remember you as someone else entirely. D.B. Cooper, a name that was never yours. Attached to a face no one can describe with certainty, pieced together from a handful of strangers who saw you for less than an hour. Attached to a body that was never found, in a case that was never closed, about a man who is, to this day, still falling through the dark, in the version of this story that lives in all our heads. You wake up in a room with no windows, and somewhere, you never landed at all.